Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. Good to be back with you here in January 2021. Hard to believe. What is it, like the 26th or something already? We love to have you on the program. Thank you for joining us. The point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, CEOs, people doing amazing work in the world that we can learn from so that we can do better at what we do. Now, the show is interactive, so please do ask your questions. Please get online, and we broadcast on LinkedIn Live, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all of those. So we do monitor those feeds during the program. So feel free to write and ask a question of our guest. That's why we're here. Today, I've got Mike Poznansky. Mike is the founding partner and managing partner of Neato, an agency focused on helping brands understand and connect with young audiences, with a special focus on Gen Z and college students. We were on last week and having a fantastic conversation, and we got cut off. So I want to have Mike back on today so that we could continue that conversation. And Mike, welcome back.
Thanks, Rhett. Good to be here.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what was going on last week with internet, but anyway, we're back and we're going to do this today. And so, we were talking last week, and I would sort of just go back over what we talked about, but how is COVID affecting marketing to young people and marketing to, and how are brands, have they shifted their focus during COVID in their terms of their marketing to young people?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, everything's changed. And to some extent, really, and the agency's Neato, it's a common mispronunciation. Sometimes people look at it and read Neato, but it's Neato. And some of the, and one of the things that is important to us, important part of our process, is always staying in touch with young people and always staying in touch with students by having conversations with them. So what you've seen throughout this process is students and young people at large, like everyone, their lives have changed. And so the ways in which you communicate and connect with them are a little different, and their needs have evolved, right? So brands that are really focused on meeting the needs of young people have to take into account the experiences that they're having today, which in many ways are different than the experiences that they were having before March 2020. So certainly things have shifted in the way people are going about their lives, and brands that are doing a good job of staying in touch with their behaviors and their wants and needs have adjusted their approach accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we often, and I'm probably guilty of it too, but we are often sort of lump Gen Z and Gen X. I mean, we often lump generations together and talk about, and when we talk about them. But what do you find in your research, about their values, needs, and priorities, their beliefs? What do you find with like, say, the Gen Z generation? I mean, what do you see that is really important to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, over the last 10, 15 years, there's been such a shift in the expectations that young people have of brands. And I think with Gen Z, that's something you see that's stronger than any other prior cohort, is the expectations they have in terms of how a company utilizes its resources and the impact that organization has on society, or the problems that the world, are the world is facing in general. And we especially saw that in 2020, right? And a lot of things, I think, have been, accelerating for a number of years at this point. And 2020 very much became a peak for many of those things, or at least a recent peak. Everything from civil unrest to racial injustice to climate change to political division. So I think the one differentiator with Gen Z, and you saw this with millennials, but it's really strong with Gen Z, is just what what are you doing with the resources that you have? What are you doing with the privilege that you have as an organization? The power, the influence, the money, the relationships, the assets. So that's something that is tried and true. The stakes are higher.
Yeah. When I was coming up in the agency world, I remember my boss telling me one time, those, that the younger kids, they don't have money. Your focus is going to be 35 to 55. That's our, that's where we're going to advertise. That's who we're going to advertise to. Is that thinking out of the window now? Is there a realization that young people actually spend money?
Yeah, look, it's a fair point. I'm sure if you were to do some sort of quantitative study with the amount of money that someone makes a year and spends a year, you would probably see much higher trends when they reach that stage in their life. That's just reality. What makes it different with young people is the influence that they have and the stage that they're at in their lives. So from a standpoint of influence, it's interesting. It's like this apex of influence. And we saw this with students. Most of my career was at Red Bull. I spent over a decade there. And at first it was, college is a really great place for us to be as a brand, as a product, right? Especially as an energy drink. Over time, we started to see, wait a minute, this is a really influential moment for them. It's coming of age, especially in America. It's the first time they're out of their home. It's the first time that they're filling their own shopping basket, their own grocery cart. They're decorating their own space, their fridge. So you're like, wow, this is a really pivotal and influential time where they're finding their way as a consumer and building some habits, behaviors, and loyalties that are going to go well beyond college, right? So as they go out into the real world and they start making more money, those will stick. And then it's also interesting because you see this almost this shift with students and their parents, because young people are so much more plugged in. They'll say like, hey, we want to find a really cool place to stay when we go to Kauai. Can you help us out or help us find cheap tickets? Or what computer should I buy? Or what cell phone carrier, right? Like they look to their kids for insight and guidance and validation and credibility. And then of course, what you have as well is people in that age bucket influencing people who are younger than them. So fair point when it comes to the size of their wallet. But if you wait until they're at that point, you've probably missed the boat.
Yeah, no, I was, as I asked that question, that was sort of the answer in my brain that I came to, right? That it seems like, there was a lot of missed opportunity back when I was doing agency work, that why not build that brand loyalty early on? And so that makes a lot of sense to me. You talk about a brand's goals and consumer needs don't need to be mutually exclusive. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times at an organization, they're thinking about themselves. A company, they have to make money and they have to perform. So they're often looking at things and saying, what are we going to do to make sure that we meet our goals as a brand, as a business, right? That's just fundamental 101. I think the mistake that companies can make and even marketers can make is starting and ending their process there, right? So with most companies, and I would say with every organization, if this younger generation is a viable target for you, there's going to be somewhere where your assets that you have as an organization, your resources, your relationships, whatever it may be, is going to meet with the needs of young people. It could be their wants, their fears, their desires, their pain points, whatever that may be. So from a process perspective and even just a mindset, one thing that's been part of my approach since long before I had an agency is just finding where those two things intersect. So it's really about it starts with understanding your consumer and understanding your audience and getting to know what their needs are. And at some point in that, you're going to say, okay, hey, there's an opportunity here for us to help, or maybe it's alleviate this pain point, or maybe it's to add value to their life in this particular way. And so when you find that those two things meet in the middle, that's where you're going to really make an impact. And in the end, that's where you're going to win as a brand and win as a business. So I guess that's really what we mean when we talk about that from an agency perspective, about those two things not needing to be mutually exclusive. So we always look at how could we design programs that positively impact young people's lives and help achieve our clients' goals.
Do you think that Gen Z, any of these, the younger generations are more inclined to look at a brand and see where they are on social issues, see where they are in politics, see what they believe and how they act? Are they more serious about that kind of? I mean, and I think that's the perception, but I don't know if that's true. Is it? I mean, are people more conscious of that nowadays?
Yeah, I think people, young people in particular, have far higher expectations of companies and of brands, and the ones that they are most loyal to and have an affinity towards are companies who have values that align with theirs or that are making a positive impact. Look, the reality is there are a lot of companies or services or products being utilized day in and day out that may not have a stance on anything, right? Or may not be doing a whole lot with the resources that they have available. And there are different ways to look at loyalty. So, I mean, I think Google's a really cool brand, but you could use Google as an example. Someone could utilize that every single day because it's simple, it works, it's effective. There's no real alternative to it, whatever it may be. So they could command a large audience, and people could be loyal to them from a behavioral standpoint, right? Day in and day out, they're utilizing it. But when it comes to real emotional loyalty, brands that young people love and would stay loyal to regardless and would advocate for and talk about and say, okay, right, I couldn't imagine my life without, or I would never buy anything but this brand, or this is a company where I really want to be spending, I want to be giving my money to because I believe in them and I believe in what they're doing and I love what they're doing. To meet that threshold, young people have far higher expectations up to this day. And then you also have the flip side. It's like, well, what brands and companies am I going to discount altogether? And ones that they feel are possibly misusing their power or having a negative impact on the world. It's like, then you could just be totally written off altogether, regardless of how great your product is.
Yeah, there aren't that many brands that really elicit that kind of either way, really, right? I mean, those kind of responses, whether it's I can think of a few that people really love, like Apple maybe would be one of them, or but maybe even anyway. That's really fascinating. What for you is there any with this generation in terms of using social media as a marketing tool? What do you see on the horizon? I mean, how are brands going to use social media? Because I know a lot of my generation is kind of fatigued with things like Facebook and Facebook and Twitter maybe. But what do you see in changes in terms of advertising and marketing towards young people on social? What platforms are working? What's not?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because and I think it's still very much true today, where everyone wants to talk about influencers. And I think one thing you're finally seeing is the gig is up a little bit, right? Where you spend 6 to 7 figures and force someone to talk about or utilize or, create some content with a product, and suddenly it becomes this big win for you. It's like the modern day Super Bowl commercial. So you're definitely seeing a shift towards that. And it's not denying that the power and the value of influence. It's more of an emphasis on a real, genuine, authentic connection and real, genuine, and authentic representation of a brand, right? Of a product, a true endorsement. So people are a little bit more cynical when it comes to marketing, and they're a little bit more suspicious, and they're also highly educated. One of the most powerful things that I've seen is where individuals or organizations use social media as a platform to build a better connection with their audience, right? You saw that with the political cycle in 2020. I mean, Twitch is a wonderful example. When AOC decides to tweet that she's going to go and play a game on Twitch, which really is what Twitch was known for, but through that, have a conversation with young people about voting. Or you had Trey, the lead singer of Fish, did the Beacon Jams, right? Where it was this multi-night show at the Beacon, and everybody missed live music. And suddenly they're putting on a really amazing set of shows with in a really amazing setting with wonderful sound, and they're having real conversations with people. So suddenly Joe from Ohio is putting in a request for a song or writing some sort of comment, and the band's playing that back. So the really cool thing is, like,
never would have been able to do, right?
No way.
I mean,
exactly. So the two-way dialogue that's taking place. But the world of just like trying to force your product or yourself to go viral, it's just come a long ways. The great thing is when it happens by accident, right? Or just by luck. We saw, right at this point, the inauguration was a week ago, and the Bernie Sanders wearing the homemade mittens that the teacher made in Vermont and a Burton jacket. Like, what a win for Burton. And their social media team was on it, and they're posting it right away. They're like, steal this look. And they're showing the mittens, and how wonderful for Burton, a brand from Vermont that really has its roots there, to have the other elements of this outfit be part of that. So it's like, hey, get these mittens from this Vermont resident, whatever, recycled, upcycled, handmade. Oh, and here's our jacket, and here's the model of it, and it costs this much. So that's where it becomes like it's opportunistic, and sometimes you get lucky, and you just want to make sure you're ready to respond.
I love how he made sweatshirts of that, and then I mean, Bernie did. Bernie made his own sweatshirts out of that and donated the profits to, I think, Meals on Wheels or some other charity in Vermont. So I thought that was pretty clever, pretty quick to capitalize on, like you said, on the opportunity. Are there any other platforms? I mean, when it comes down to things like TikTok and even now Clubhouse, which is out, are those going to be? I mean, I'm sure TikTok's already been. Advertisers are taking advantage of that already. How are they going to be using those platforms?
Yeah, it's a good question. Clubhouse is interesting. I just recently joined it. Fantastic idea, especially, you have to wonder how much COVID laid the ground for a product like that, right? And so it's taking, and also the power of podcasts, right? So, for me, I think the interesting thing is it's not so much like what is the next big new platform. It's how can I authentically, as a brand, how can I authentically and effectively utilize whichever social media platform that I want to take part in. There are some broader trends, right? The reality is, like, you're not going to see a lot of this younger generation utilizing Facebook day to day, right? But one of the things that we often see is it's so easy to get caught up in, like, what is the next big thing? And so it's like, oh, don't worry, Instagram's out. Everybody's on TikTok now. Well, then you start to have conversations with young people and get a better understanding of their day to day. And you could see they may still very much utilize it, or the relationship with it is far different. So the one thing I'd say about social is the best thing that a brand could do is if they move someone, if they do something that a person loves or enjoys, then they're going to talk about it. The young people are going to talk about it. They're going to post on your behalf. Mm-hmm. Often I think the mistake is like, how do we force this? How do we mandate this? How do we make sure we could, kick the door down and get our product out there or get our brand out there? And it's like, move people. If they care, if they like what you're doing or they like what you've done for them, they'll talk about it, and you don't even have to pay for it.
How do you do that in a genuine way?
You have to know. I mean, if I were to say to you, say we had say you had a good friend or a neighbor or someone that I wanted to thank, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't know them very well, and you did. I would go to you, and you would probably have a dozen things that I could do for them that would be meaningful for them, right? So, and that's because you know them. So as a brand and as an organization, if you know them, that answer is easy. And of course, there are some limitations of scale, right? If you have hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of customers, you're not going to know every single one of them. But taking the time to have a real understanding of who they are and what moves them and what their needs are, it is going to make that discussion and decision-making process easy for you. And the how answer really varies by the brand and the organization, and really varies by what's happening in young people's lives.
And one of the challenges having been in business and knowing enough about marketing to get myself in trouble, but not do it probably as effectively as I could, is that connection that you were just talking about, and understanding the customer. And so the challenge for me, and what I want to get to a little bit today, is where do you go to get that knowledge and that information? I know you can ask customers and you can do, but I mean, how do you, as a marketing person, as an agency, really, really help the customer target the right audience? I mean, how do you know? I mean, as a business owner, you've got somebody that comes in and says, well, let me do your website. And you've got somebody that says, well, let me do your SEO. And then you've got somebody that says, let me do your social media. And to me, it's all disconnected often with who your customer is and with, what the strategy is to reach them. And so, I mean, to me, that's where we break down when our marketing fails, is that we're not, clearly our messaging isn't right to the customer. So how do you help people get to that?
Yeah. So it's an interesting strategic exercise, right? And there are a lot of people out there, and it was a mistake we almost made as an agency at the beginning. You could say, hey, we are experts in X space or with Y consumer. We know, I think we actually used to say this, we know them better than anyone else, right? Full stop. And if you're a brand or an organization, you have a question, you want to come in this room and say, what do students think about this? Or how are they going to feel about this? Or what would Gen Z say? I'll have an answer for you. And the interesting thing is we started to say, you know what, why don't we make some assumptions and let's lay out our hypothesis, and then let's go ahead and test that. So a brand or an organization would come to us and we would say, here's where we think this opportunity is. And this is something that we think is a really interesting strategic opportunity, and potentially some tactics that could stem from that strategy. And then we go and test that by talking to people, not even putting that strategy in front of them, but by asking the questions that would lead to that realization. And then eventually transition that conversation into an actual strategy or potentially some actual tactics. And even in that process, you could co-create with your consumers. Hey, here's something that we're really interested in trying. How do you feel about it? What would be, what's your take on it? How do you think this would be better? What do you think it could look like? And I will tell you, every single time And I have this conversation even in new business. Say, look, we could pull things out of a hat and we could say, here are the things we think would work. We had it recently with an organic food brand, but I said, really, to give you an informed answer, I need to go talk to people about this, about the category, about frozen foods, organic foods, better understand how they're feeling, what they're missing there. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the more we do it, the more valuable it is. And I still, as agency owner and principal, I actively participate in the majority of those interviews because it helps me be incredibly effective at my job. And the only difference between me and the marketer is my curiosity, will, desire, and availability to go and be having those conversations. And that's what makes me credible and our work credible and effective.
I have a colleague, Martin Lindstrom, who one of the top thought leaders in the world in marketing. And I think he's stayed something like 3,000 nights in customers' homes with the products that he represents. I mean,
amazing.
Truly trying to get to know their thoughts and opinions and their feelings and their pain points and their, just to get to know, sort of to your point, right, where he's trying to really, really deeply understand what it is that drives them to buy this product or that. And I think what you're talking about in terms of co-creating is really fascinating, right? Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense to me about pulling people into those conversations. And I mean, would you take it as far as even to the design and the idea of whether or not you do this product or not, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, I'm sure, what your former colleague could tell you, by spending time in people's homes, you start to see there's a disconnect between what people will sometimes report and then the way they actually behave, right? So a good example would be like, hey, when you go shopping for food, what do you buy, right? Or, oh, I look for things that are healthy and I like to spend more money on this and this and this. And then it's like, all right, well, now let's open your fridge and now let's go in your pantry. What's all this? I thought you only buy healthy food, right? Or I think, right. I just, like to spend this now and again. So there's this projected self that I think could come out from all of us, because you may speak to what you want to be the ideal version of you, or the you that you aspire to be or that you hope to be. And then there's also the reality. So it's just as important to immerse yourself into that culture whenever possible.
Mm-hmm. What is you do a lot of work with brands and universities and how they can create experiences for young people. Talk about that a little bit. And what is it? Is it a different experience when you're working with a university? What's the talk about that a little bit? Yeah.
The difference between working with a university or a brand?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, the really great thing so far about our work with universities is they are 100% genuinely interested in the impact that they could have in students' lives, full stop. Okay. So we aren't dealing with anyone who's worried about, directly worried about making a profit and bringing in revenue. At the end of the day, the majority of these universities are for profit, and they need students to enroll and to pay in order for them to have a job. But usually the people we're working with, it's a little bit different. So for example, Boston University, they were really focused on cultivating a culture of wellness on and around campus within the student population. They were starting to see some trends that were a little bit alarming to them in terms of stress that students had in their lives, some of the issues around potential substance abuse, mental health problems, whatever it may be. And also we're realizing that a lot of these students weren't utilizing their services. This was the more or less the wellness department, if you will, the team of people who are focused on overseeing the mental health and physical health of students. So there was a disconnect there. So the great thing about work like that is it's purely focused on that need state, 100%, right? Like we are genuinely invested in making sure that people are physically and mentally well on our campus. The people that as they come here, as they are here, and as they leave here, and that's where their objectives start and end. Where it's a little different, of course, with a brand, because in most cases, even if they are 100% invested in the impact that they're having, at the end of the day, it is an organization and it is a business, and money is also incredibly powerful. The one thing that is the same is just the complicated matrix of stakeholders and decision makers and people that you have to appeal to in that process, right? You see that a lot. It was surprising with universities how siloed some of those groups can be, although they are all invested in providing students with a positive experience. So far, we've seen they don't always work very well together or collaborate really, really closely. So a number of differences, but I would say that's the most remarkable one, is just that the pure intention that a university will have, at least the people we've worked with thus far.
What do you think? Because I wonder about my own kids and what their buying habits and what they will want when they grow up. And I mean, what do you think is sort of different from today? What do you think kids, Gen Z, younger people, are they going to be buying cars like our parents did and we probably did? Are they going to be buying houses? Are they going to be doing the Airbnb thing for their work life, where they just travel and they work from remotely? What's your crystal ball for that generation? Like, if you had to sort of think about what they were going to be like as consumers, what do you think?
It's an interesting question. I wish I had that crystal ball. I think the one thing I could say with total confidence is that people's relationships with these things have changed, and that was happening already, and that was especially accelerated in 2020, right? So you've certainly seen this whole notion of, hey, right, the American dream is for me to go and land a really great, stable job and to find myself, eventually go and move back to some neighborhood and get the home and the white picket fence, and what sort of car am I going to have, or number of cars, or whatever that may be. I think the interesting thing is everybody's expectations have shifted there, where for some people that will still very much be the case, right? I think it's usually when everyone says, "Oh, this is the permanent end of, this is the death of," right? It never necessarily transpires that way, but now people have permission to not do that. People have permission to live where they want to live, and live in a way that they want to live. And so I think a lot of the social construct and those rules and expectations have deteriorated and will continue to deteriorate as this generation becomes the majority. And it's going to be everyone's going to be much more focused on what they need and want and what fulfills them, and a little less concerned on conforming.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of what my conversations with young people that it also centers around experience, and that experience is a lot more important, particularly in things like travel and going places and doing things, and a lot less on the materialistic. I don't know if that's a trend or not, but I definitely, people that I talk to, and maybe it's just the kids, young people I talk to, but there seems to be a lot more focus on that. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a heightened awareness on what matters. So 100%, I think that's where one of the ways it comes to life. So just saying, what is it that I want and what is it that I need? And realizing that a lot of those things may not bring them joy. The difference too would be, I'm going to spend a lot of money and I'm going to overinvest on the things that I care about and do bring me joy. And in some of those cases, it may be a product. It may be a really well-designed car because you love cars and that's your passion. Or it may be some cosmetic brand that you really enjoy. It makes you feel really good. But then also dialing back on things that matter less to you, right? And I think the difference is the way that's measured is by individual, where in the past you would see a lot more consistencies. It's where you live. It's the type of home, the size of home. It's the job you have. Do you have a big do you work for a big company with a big title and you have a big salary? Also, that's another interesting thing. You've seen that now is like people, and this is a problem with students as well, is not celebrating a unhealthy relationship, an unhealthy work-life balance, and not celebrating being super stressed out and super burnt out all the time. So people having a much better understanding of what their needs are, and I think having permission to seek those and even state them and find a way to make sure those are fulfilled. And you do see a lot of conflict of that, right? Everyone's like, oh, it's such a nightmare to have a millennial working for you, right? They're just such a pain in the butt, and they expect everything and they want everything or whatever. But I think a lot of it too, it's like people are a little bit more in touch with their needs and are a little bit more explicit in getting them. Certainly could potentially use a little bit more polish in the way in which they go about it. But it's like that power dynamic has shifted a little bit.
Yeah, it has. I think there's a real art to managing people. This is an interesting time to be in the workforce, right? Where you've got sort of the baby boomers, and you've got I'm a Gen Y, or what am I, Gen X or Gen X? Am I Gen X or Gen Y? You've got 4 different generations in the workforce right now, which is, I think, fascinating. So I'm sure there are a ton of research on how to manage and with those 4 different types of people and expectations. But it's been a real pleasure to have you on today. Thank you for being on and sharing with us. And so Mike, what would the final takeaway for you be? And what would the final message be for you today?
Yeah, a final takeaway, especially for marketers out there and people who want to better connect with young people, would just be to make an explicit effort to better understand them. You could read PowerPoint decks all day, every day, and that's not going to help you get in touch with your audience or with a younger generation. Go out there, immerse yourself in the same culture, have conversations with them, look them in the eye, understand what their needs are, their wants, their fears, their desires. And I think that's going to make a real meaningful difference for marketers and ultimately for the impact that they could have on people's lives. And at the end of the day, make our work a little bit more purposeful, right? It can be for profit, but we can have a positive impact, and we could utilize our resources for good. And that's something that, regardless of the type of organization you work for, is something that'll help you go home and feel good about what you're doing in your professional life.
Well, can't say it any better than that. Thank you for putting a nice touch on that final question. And thank you for joining us today here on Power Lunch. We'll be back tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern. Mike, thank you. And how can people find you and Neato?
Yeah, thanks, Rhett. Best place, our website, neato.agency. We also, you could find us on social as well. We have a Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever it may be, but we're proactively publishing a lot more insights now on our website, and then promoting them as well on social. So it's the best place to reach us.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Rhett. Thanks for having me.